Hello and a warm welcome to the debate on Press TV. I'm your host, Behruz Najafi. Stop the endless hostility. That's what President Donald Trump advised the media do after suspected explosives were posted to a number of high-profile figures in the U.S., including former President Barack Obama, former Vice President Joe Biden, and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has launched a probe. Critics called Trump's comments hypocritical, blaming him for using incendiary rhetoric against his critics. Now, what's the reason behind such terrorist acts to take place in the U.S. when midterm elections are just around the corner? Now, before we discuss the issue of U.S. mail bombs, let's go to New York and get an update from our correspondent there, Susan Muderis. Susan, bring us an update and also tell us about the reactions.
Right. As you mentioned, the timing is very significant. It's close to the midterm elections, less than 2 weeks. It's also significant because, once again, both sides, whether the Democrats want to acknowledge it or not, are playing the blame game. They're saying that it was Donald Trump, that he was the cause of people going out and setting off these bombs because he attacks the media. But on the other hand, you see the media really being on the attack against the Republicans. Another issue is, as you know, New York is a hub. It's a former residential establishment of the former U.S. President, Donald Trump. It's also a very liberal state. That's why you hear that there had been latest bombings, not only at the CNN headquarters in New York and not Washington, but also at the famed actor Robert De Niro's restaurant in downtown Manhattan, who had also been a critic. One thing that we need to take into consideration is, yes, Donald Trump has been very vocal against the media, coining the term fake news, and critics saying that in a country that a lot of states have lax laws on the internet and gun laws, someone is going to rise up and act in accordance with what the President Donald Trump says. On the other hand, you had a suspicious package less than a year ago being sent to Donald Trump Jr.'s house, addressed to Donald Trump Jr. with white powder, in which his wife opened the envelope, and there was, a white substance which later was declared as not being dangerous. So Donald Trump Jr. basically went on Twitter and called the Democrats hypocrites and the media hypocrite for not covering that story and covering, these very dangerous bomb threats. But what's certain is what we see now is a country that's very divided, and a president that apparently is not willing to go as far as to say these things need to stop, these attacks need to stop. A statement here and there is one thing, a statement by his daughter, Ivanka Trump, is another, but really coming out and not attacking the media as the president of a country is bothersome. And to have, tweets go out in a country like the United States saying if you're a journalist or if you are a Democrat and you see suspicious activity happening around you, report it to the NYPD, that's a cause for concern for sure.
All right, thank you for that. That was Susan Muderis, our correspondent, joining us. Now let me introduce the guests who are going to join us in the debate today. We will have political scientist and talk show host Dr. Wilmer Leon from Washington, D.C., and also Professor Emeritus with the University of Minnesota Duluth, James H. Fetzer, who is joining us from Madison. Now let me begin with Dr. Wilmer Leon in Washington, D.C. Now, the recipients of the explosive parcels are Democrats, and among Trump's loud opponents. Does this mean that the U.S., as our correspondent also mentioned, now divided and polarized more than ever?
Well, I think it's too early to say, just because right now that the recipients of the packages are Democrats, that this is targeted at Democrats. We know that America has a history of false flag operations, whether it be the sinking of the Maine, the Gulf of Tonkin. We know that there was a proposal made to President Kennedy to allege that the Cubans had downed an American airliner. So let's allow the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the other agencies that are involved in running these facts to ground to do just that, and be sure that it is, as many people are assuming it is, an attack on Democrats and those that are in opposition to the president.
Okay, let me ask our other guest, James H. Fetzer, who do you think could be behind this act of terror? Of course, U.S. media have not called it act of terror. And who benefits from this with the midterm elections just about 2 weeks away?
Well, as even the former FBI Assistant Director Chris Wechter has observed, this bomb plot could be someone who's trying to get the Democratic vote out and incur sympathy. This does appear to be a classic and actually very clumsy example of a false flag, where an action is perpetrated but blamed on sources other than those who were actually responsible. We appear to have several persons involved here, since we have the multiple deliveries of these packages which had stamps but which weren't postmarked. They hadn't been processed by the post office, although one, I gather, was actually discovered in a post office, not delivered. The devices themselves appear to be very flimsy and to be more theatrical than actually threatening. So I endorse the commentator's observation that we need to get to the heart of this. The fact is, the national security apparatus of the United States is designed to deal with issues just like this. Threats, bombs, whatever, sent through the mail, directed at prominent targets. And I believe that it's going to be very rapidly resolved and the identity will be exposed. But my personal conviction already is that this is a fabricated event, because the Democrats are desperate that their expected blue wave is fallen so low as to be no more than a trickle, and actually it looks much more like we're about to encounter a red tide.
Okay, now let's go to Dr. Leon. All the targets of these mails are frequently criticized by right-wing critics, and they are vocal opponents of President Trump. What does this indicate?
Well, if we accept the premise that because all of the targets have been vocal critics of the president, that the targets are in fact Democrats or those on the left, if we are to accept that premise, then what this would tell us is that the president's rhetoric his incendiary rhetoric is making what historically has been a very contentious political climate in this country even more so. But what we also have to remember is that Donald Trump is the culmination of a rhetorical, hyperbolic political rhetorical landscape. He is the culmination of it. He is not an aberration of it.
Okay, and Professor Fetzer, some Democrats are accusing President Trump of inciting violence with his rhetoric. Do you agree with that?
Well, the Donald has said some things from time to time that were certainly inadvisable about getting, protesters out of rallies and the like. But it's nothing comparable to what we've had from the left, even at the time of the inauguration. No less a figure than Madonna was talking about having dreams of blowing up the White House. The comedian Kathy Griffin has held what was a simulated severed head of Donald Trump. We had some anti-Republican extremists go out to a baseball game where Republican congressmen were playing and shooting at several of them and wounding seriously the GOP party whip. It would have been a good thing if the Democrats had been very severe in condemning this kind of behavior. But instead, on the contrary, we've had figures like Maxine Waters, to isolate one particularly striking case, who has been encouraging the public to go out and to confront members of the Republican Party, Ted Cruz, Mitch McConnell, Sarah Sanders. They've been hounded at restaurants. They've been harassed. This was very bad. And therefore, if you're going to weigh the balance between who has created more of these offensive forms of behavior, I think the Democrats win it going away. Last night, Donald was here in Wisconsin, where I reside near Madison, And he was very appropriate, talking about, calming down the rhetoric that we need to be civil and act together. And that's in striking contrast with even the behavior recently of Hillary Clinton, who said, in essence, we can't be civil in our conduct to our political opponents until we've taken control of the House or the Senate. That was highly inappropriate. So frankly, I come down on the side of Donald Trump in this instance because the Democrats' behavior has been much more outrageous than anything he has done.
Okay, let's go to Washington, D.C. Dr. Leon, do you agree with Professor Fetzer?
No, and that is unfortunately, that is the common Republican trope that is being constantly recited and recited and recited. The first differentiation between Donald Trump and Maxine Waters is Donald Trump is the President of the United States of America. Maxine Waters is a Congresswoman. Maxine Waters merely encouraged people to exercise their First Amendment right to express themselves and to challenge government where they feel necessary. There is nothing wrong with if you see Sarah Sanders in a restaurant to let Sarah Sanders know that you don't appreciate the fact that she comes on American television every day and lies to the American people. If you see Mitch McConnell in a restaurant, there's nothing wrong with letting Mitch McConnell know that as the Senate Majority Leader, you don't appreciate him lying to the American people. Sarah Sanders works for us. Mitch McConnell works for us. We pay their salaries. And there is a reason why in American law, there's a difference whether it's libel or slander law, that there's a difference between approaching or dealing with public figures versus personal figures. These are grown people. They're grown men, big boys and big girls. They are out in the public square. And when they are out in the public square, it is fair for the public to address them. Donald Trump, as President of the United States, has never been able to differentiate himself as an individual versus Donald Trump, the president. And he is not acting presidential, and it is his language, whether it be related to Muslims, whether it be related to the migrant caravan, and lying about the Middle Eastern component and the terrorist component of the caravan. None of that is acceptable. You cannot compare the two in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, let's go to Madison. Professor Fetzer, some of the Trump supporters blamed the attempted attacks on Democrats to win the midterm elections. What do you think about this allegation?
Oh, yeah. We have this former assistant director of the FBI saying precisely that. We have a retired FBI profiler by the name of James Fitzgerald saying he believes that's what's going on here, that it's a false flag to help the Democrats. Frankly, I have in the past been very supportive of the Democratic Party. I voted for Bill Clinton twice. I voted for Barack Obama twice. But when it came to the decision between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, for me, it was quite clear cut. And I'm very, very supportive today of the Donald. The Democrats, I think, are becoming increasingly desperate because their efforts to bolster their case for the midterms has been falling apart. They sought to tarnish Brett Kavanaugh, the president's nominee to the Supreme Court, on the basis of what turned out to be completely fabricated allegations of sexual improprieties that became increasingly more and more ridiculous and absurd. Jeff Flake asked for a supplemental FBI investigation, which turned out to be very important, in my opinion, because although Brett Kavanaugh had been subject to FBI reviews of his background 6 times in the past, they all began when he was 18 years old. I think, therefore, this attack from Blasey Ford, allegedly in high school when he was only 17, was therefore cleverly contrived to make it not the case that he'd already been cleared of these offenses, but the supplemental FBI investigation did that in spades. Senator Susan Collins gave a magnificent summation of the case. I believe that the Democrats' anxieties that Brett Kavanaugh would vote to undo Roe v. Wade are all misplaced. He has a high degree of respect for President. He's indicated he's not going to seek to overturn Roe v. Wade. So that effort to really weaponize the Me Too movement to benefit the Democrats and against the president's nominee has proven to be a complete failure. This migrant caravan now approaching the United States, when you look at the visual effects of this very large number, which, by the way, appear to be aided and abetted by George Soros, we even have photographic evidence of them being loaded into trucks, some of which are flatbed trucks, so they're being transported here in an aggressive fashion. They're not actually walking. This appears to be another political stunt that's falling apart, because when you look at the visuals, it's virtually a campaign commercial for the wall. I believe, therefore, the Democrats are desperate to find something that can bolster their chances for the midterm, because by any reasonable estimation, I would suggest the Republicans are going to pick up between 3 to 5 seats in the Senate as things stand today, and run at least even in the House. There's no prospect whatsoever of a blue wave. And I believe this bomb attack was therefore a sign of their desperation.
Okay, Dr. Leon. Trump has tweeted that, and I'm quoting his tweet, a very big part of the anger that we see today in our society is caused by the purposely false and inaccurate reporting of the mainstream media, which I refer to as fake news. Mainstream media must clean up its acts fast. That was direct quotation, Mr. Trump's tweet. Who is to blame, do you think, for this division and polarization that you see in U.S. society these days?
Well, there is enough blame to go around, but I think you have to start with the president. The false media that he continues to attack is an organization that merely has been accurately relaying his comments. And for anyone to say at this stage of this investigation that this is a false flag operation to benefit the Democrats is just the height of irresponsibility, because no one knows where these packages are coming from. So even though there may be some former FBI people that are on television saying these things, the fact that they're former FBI doesn't really give them any more credibility than anybody else if they don't know where the packages are coming from. In fact, it makes them more irresponsible, because they should know better. So this whole idea of fake news, and I really even don't like using that term, because again, that's a creation of from the mind of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the one that talked about beating people up in his own rallies. Donald Trump is the one that demonstrated his support for a member of Congress who was charged with assault for attacking a reporter. That's Donald Trump. That's not CNN. That's not a fiction of MSNBC. That's not even a fiction of the fake Fox News. Those instances are real. And the problem is that mainstream American media is holding Donald Trump accountable for the irresponsible statements that he makes.
Okay. Now, Professor Fetzer, I got a question for you. Now, how do you think can this affect the political landscape in the United States just 2 weeks before the midterm elections?
Well, it's very interesting because nobody's buying it. Investment Watch blog has already done a poll of around 12,000. What are your thoughts about who committed today's attempted bombings? They gave 4 categories: crazy right-winger, Russians, desperate Democrats, ISIS. Russians got 1%, crazy right-winger 3, ISIS 3, desperate Democrats 93%. anyone who's paying attention to the discussions on Twitter, which are very much a barometer of a current sentiment among the informed, politically active public, will see there's overwhelming rejection of the authenticity of this event. Everyone recognizes it's a stunt. And while I hold my colleague here in high esteem for having, for example, a Sputnik radio show, which I admire greatly, I think that's simply wonderful, because Sputnik News, like RT, like Press TV, are among the most responsible sources of accurate reporting about especially foreign affairs we have available to the public in the world today. It's not a leap. I mean, my background is in scientific reasoning, and I can assure you I could go through it in spades about how it's rather obvious to me, as it would be to anyone else, that this is a staged false flag attack.
All right, Professor, we're running out of time. Just 30 seconds each of you. Got one last question, beginning with Dr. Leon. Could this pipe bomb incident serve as a distraction from the Saudi dissident journalist murder at the Saudi embassy in Istanbul in any way? 30 seconds, please.
Well, it very much is taking up space that could be going to talking about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, but what we should be talking about is the horrific human crisis in Yemen. That's what really needs to be discussed.
Okay, and Professor Fetzer, very briefly, please.
Well, I agree about the role of Saudi Arabia in relation to Yemen. The crisis there is of staggering proportions. We should not be selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. The president, I'm very glad to say, has acknowledged that it appears increasingly apparent that the Crown Prince himself was involved in the death of this journalist. That's a giant step in the right directions. Clearly, this was an atrocity that ought never to have taken place. And I agree completely. I'm glad we can conclude on this note of agreement about concern for the well-being of Yemen.
All right, be sure your comments. Our guests, a political scientist and talk show host, Dr. Wilmer Leon from Washington, D.C., and Professor Emeritus with University of Minnesota Duluth, James H. Fetzer, who joined us from medicine. Thank you for watching this debate. We'll see you soon.